Christ in you is never going to be imposed upon you, but He'll be exposed through life situations. And so situations come that actually expose the Christ that is in you. And it's not something that's imposed on you through work. But what we like to do, and when I'm working with someone, is to create a jail cell for them where they don't have anywhere to go but to look up. And so I want to box you in so there's no place to go and there's no hope in you. Because when there's no hope in you, you'll look to Him. As we mentioned the other day, we don't know that Christ is all we need until Christ is all that we have. And so God is busy boxing us in, and this fallen world is the perfect womb for the child of God to be birthed in. And part of our spiritual pregnancy, as that's going to be birthed in us, is that He's going to box us in so there's no place to look other than up toward Him. And He'll do that by revealing our controlling lying emotions, what our self-life is, how we can't deal with lying thoughts, how we're controlled by an identity, how we still live in our idolatry, and then, of course, our own unbelief. And so we're going to begin to work through that and take a look at those different things. I remember talking to a woman who was telling me all of her problems. She was about 80 years old. And when she got all done, I said, well, I don't have any problems. And she looked at me and she said, aren't you special? And I said, well, the thing is, sister, trouble's not in the trouble, it's in the heart's attitude toward the trouble. Nothing ever goes wrong, I just end up going wrong with it. Now, this is hard to swallow, but when you have a problem, you have the problem. It isn't somebody else's problem. It's something is going on and it's revealing something in you, and the question is, what's it revealing in you? If you continue to look to others when you have a problem, you'll only have a move in self. But if you'll look at yourself, you can actually have a move in God when you have those problems. So I look at it like this. I'll draw out a little tree, and each one of these branches is a problem in your life. And so the woman comes in and she says, well, the problem is my kids. I like that story about the lady that went into the psychiatrist. Do you remember that? And sure, her hair was undone and the buttons were off, and she had one high heel and one flat, and her makeup went off this way. And he said, what's wrong? She said, it's the kids. He's driving me nuts. And he said, well, listen, I can't talk to you in this state. Here's some medication. Take it with you. Come back in 30 days. And then we'll try to talk. She came back in 30 days. Her hair was perfect. She was immaculately dressed. Everything was, makeup was, she just looked beautiful. Her countenance a lift. He said, well, I've never seen medication work that quickly. And she said, oh, it worked right away, but I can't believe how much the kids sleep on it. Well, we look at that, and that's how we want to fix the problems. And we go ahead and we can counsel and we can do all kinds of things to work on these problems. And maybe even eventually just cut the branch off. But what happens is the power of a tree is in its root system, and it just sends the life into another branch and makes it a little bit bigger. And now I need to talk about my husband and what he's doing. And maybe I need to cut him off eventually. And then if I cut off enough branches, what I'll find out is that something new is sprouted out here. Well, again, what we want to do is go to the source of the thing and look at the root rot. What's feeding all of this? Now, this isn't pie in the sky, because don't all of you know people who go through similar situations and this person is wiped out and this person has peace and a lift in their spirit? Have you seen that happen? Is that witness to you? So we know that it's possible to go through a real drama and some real calamity with the peace of God in our lives. And so we see people in like situations, and in one situation it hardens the person, and in the other situation it softens the person. One day I was walking in the woods in Colorado, just up by the cabin, and I just stopped and I was praying, and I noticed how the sunlight was allowing one tree to grow, but the dead tree, that same light, was rotting. Well, if you have life in you, then whatever happens when the light shines on you, you're going to grow. But if you're dead, you're just going to go deader with that same light. And so we see people who have really dealt with things and have come to Christ, and we have proof in it because, again, truth isn't something you preach. It's demonstrated that they could have the peace of God if you deal with these root issues in your life. So we want to go to the root of things in this understanding of self. So we'll take a model of man from 1 Thessalonians 5:23, where Paul talks about having a spirit and a soul and a body. We have a three-part diagram of man here. Later on, I'll use a two-part diagram. Sometimes I'm in places and they go, we don't believe in a three-part man, so I just take this and throw it away and I get out the two-part man. If you don't believe in the two-part, we go to the three-part. It doesn't bother me. If you don't believe in any one of those, you come up and teach and say something that's going to help the people. It doesn't bother me any, because the goal is we want to help people. So some people say, no, man's only got two parts, and he has a lower soul and an upper soul. And so the lower soul is the body and soul together. The upper is the soul and the spirit together. Our goal in all of this is just to visualize and get an idea of what's going on inside of us so we can understand ourselves just a little bit. Now, God made you out of the dust of the earth. He breathed His Spirit. You became a living soul. Why did He create you? And 1 John 4:8 tells us why. Because God is love. And love must have an object. So He created you to be the desire, because of the desire of love that He has for you. And He did something that I think is very, very clever. What He did to make sure you would come to Him is that He put in your spirit spiritual needs that only He can meet. And those needs, as we read through the Scripture, we see that man wants to be loved, and he wants acceptance, and he needs assurance, and he wants security, and he'd like to have somebody committed to him, a total commitment. And man also has a need to be significant. Those are all spiritual needs. Now the problem is, the day that Adam and Eve ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they died. They kept moving in their bodies, they kept thinking and feeling and doing, but a death took place. Where did the death take place? It took place in the spirit. Now it's impossible to get my deepest needs met. So what I do is I become self-centered. I become a human being. As I said, the characteristics of God created in His image become distorted. As a distorted human being, I go to other people and I'm trying to milk my needs out of them. And I want them to meet the needs in me that only God can meet. And I become very, very self-centered, and all that really matters is me. As I said to Betty one day, I figured out what's wrong with our family. Everybody's too self-centered just to think about me. But isn't that where we really go? And so what we're doing then is we're out there trying to get the needs that only God can meet milked out of everything around me. And so I want these needs of assurance and security and acceptance and love and significance met at the church and in religion. I want them met at the party. Do you know that the root of pornography is getting those needs met? The men will struggle the most with pornography when they've been rejected the most. So I was speaking in a prison. I asked the men, how many of you had fantasies last night? All of them raised their hands. And I said, well, here was your fantasy. A beautiful woman walks up to you in her see-through pajamas, and she comes right up to you, and then she says to you, when are you going to mow the yard? When are you going to get the kids their shoes? When are you going to fix the garage? When are you going to take care of the cupboards? When are you going to get that door that's squeaking? Is that your fantasy? They said no, and I said, well, brothers, I just came from home. That's no fantasy. That just happened. I said, no, here was your fantasy. This woman walks up to you in this gownless evening strap, and she stands there and takes off the strap and doesn't say a word, just grabs you and wants you. Do you realize that's not a sex fantasy, it's an acceptance fantasy? That when men are rejected the most and have the most pressure in their lives, that they go to that fantasy of just being accepted. You know, we've been lied to, because what we've been told is that sex for women is emotional and sex for men is physical. It's much more emotional for a man. Deny your husband and watch him pout and stomp around. And he's not pouting and stomping around because he didn't get a physical release. He's pouting and he's stomping around because of his perceived rejection. And it wasn't even rejection. And one of the things, of course, I'm so sick of hearing about pornography. Your life is more than pornography. In a Puritan society, we've made pornography the absolute worst sin that there is. And if somebody's into pornography, they're hopeless. And I've got guys who've actually suicided over pornography because they couldn't overcome that. And it's so hard to get it through a woman's head, just as you women would have a hard time getting it through my head exactly what childbirth is like. To get it through a woman's head that pornography has nothing to do with them. It has to do with the man and his need for acceptance, and it has nothing to do, it's a fantasy, and it doesn't have anything at all to do with the marriage. But I'm not saying that I blame a woman, but she just so personalizes that. That the whole marriage is over and what's wrong with me, and if I looked better would he be doing this, and the enemy's just with a full-on attack, and actually has nothing at all to do with that. Again, we're talking about root issues. It's something that the husband's brought into the marriage. You know, one of the groups, it's a Sex Anonymous group, and it's a clever group because you put a rubber band around yourself, and every time you have a bad thought, you snap it. And so these guys are snapping themselves all the time. And of course, they're obsessed on this thing. And one of my friends was in that group, and he said, I'm just going to take people through Sidetracked in the Wilderness and get off this, because there's two ways to be controlled by pornography. One's thinking about getting it, the other's staying away from it. Either way, it's the focus of your life. And I talked to his wife, and I explained this to her. I said, sister, it's got nothing to do with you. It just doesn't. You can't wear that. He brought it into the marriage. It's how he copes with his rejection. It's how he learned to get acceptance in this fantasy. Do you know she bought that? And the biggest move in that whole group is that she pulled the wives over and started working with them and got them to buy this thing, that it was their husband's problem, and that he needed to abide if he wanted to be free, because Christ is free from pornography and Christ can flow, and the issue is to get Christ on your life. She started working with the women and saying, if you want to be free from all these attacks of the enemy and all the false feelings you have and everything that it's brought up in you, why don't we do the same thing the men are and get our eyes on Christ? And it's been incredible, the shift in that group. We can look to family to meet all of those needs. We can look to our job to meet those needs. We can look to knowledge, understanding, all the other things that we do, all the entertainment. You have people today that are just addicted to videos, just one after another, after another, after another. Just a fantasy, living in another world. We say this might meet all my needs. But it won't meet my needs, and it reminds me of what my father told me when I was getting too obsessed on things. And he said, do you know, Mike, it is possible to milk a mouse. Technically, it's possible. But you've got to ask yourself, is it worth all the effort, and are you getting enough to drink? Well, is it really worth it because I'm milking a mouse? I liked what an Oklahoma couple said to me after I explained this to them. And I said, you're trying to milk out of each other the needs that only God can meet in you. And that's the problem, and it's always the problem. When you're upset with your mate, just stop and ask yourself, what need did you want to milk out of them that they couldn't give you? It's complete self-centeredness. And finally, she says, I think I understand what you're saying. Our marriage is like 2 ticks and no dog. I said, you're right on target. It's like 2 ticks with no dog. They told me the story in India about a little girl. She was staying with her grandmother, and her grandmother gave her a jigsaw puzzle of the world to put together. And she couldn't put the pieces together. She didn't know where it went. And her grandmother said, well, let me show you a secret. And she flipped the thing over, and on the other side was a picture of Jesus standing there, a very simple picture. And she quickly put it together and called in Grandma and said, that didn't take long at all to put that together. And Grandma said, now let me show you another secret. And she flipped the thing over, and the whole world had come together. Do you know that when Christ comes together, your whole world comes together? It's not that difficult. It's chaos looking on this side, but when He's your focus, it's not chaos at all. This year you'll be getting a Christmas card from me, and that Christmas card is one of those little puzzles. I had a fellow design that, and I just wanted to send that out. And it's just chaos. The way he's done ours is it's just got the world with all the problems on it and little line drawings. There's no way you could put it together. But on the other side is just the baby Jesus. And when He's the focus, everything else is going to come together. When you're trekking in the jungles in West Africa, East Africa, there aren't any maps and there aren't any trails, so you have to hire a guide. I probably shared with some of you my one guide that I have there The name for the word for guide is the way. And so the way through the jungle isn't a map and it's not a trail, but it's a person. And the way is Christ. He's the way. He's the thing that we follow. But I got one guide there. He was my first guide. And he walked up to me and he shook my hand and he said, "Hi, I'm still alive." And I said, "Hi, I'm still alive." And we shook hands. And he said, "No, I'm still alive." And I said, "Yeah, I'm still alive too." He said, "No, my name is still alive." I said, "I don't want a guide whose name is still alive. Why would I want someone that's still alive?" I said, "What happened to you that you're still alive?" And he opened up his shirt and he had the scars of a lion. And I said, "I don't know if I want a guide like that, still alive." But he was really proud of those scars that he had because he made it and he was still alive. We get those spiritual scars and we're still alive, aren't we? Well, I'd rather have somebody. I said, "I want a guide whose name has never been hurt, never been bothered." Something like that. I don't want a guide that's still alive. We look to all of these things to meet our deepest needs and they won't. And it leaves us empty and depleted. And I think that Paul asked an appropriate question in Romans 6:21. What did you gain from all of it? What have you gained from trying to milk your needs out of everyone around you except selfishness? And as I milk that and try to do that, I actually develop a self that I can't stand. See, there's a chasm in my heart that can only be filled by Christ. And if I fill it with anything else, it won't fill it and I'll remain empty. But instead of looking to Christ, I'll just keep trying the same old things that don't work to try to fill this. And we'll see the appetite for those things, the deeds of the flesh, just go up as I'm trying to fill this because I can't stand the emptiness. The secret is that if I could ever get this filled with Him, immediately all of these desires drop naturally. That's why we're talking about root issues. And we're not looking at consequence, we're going to cause. That when Christ fills this up, these things will drop off naturally. But again, it's built into us to be consequence conscious and not cause conscious. What's causing all of this? Why am I trying to do that? And of course, the reason I'm trying to do that has to do with my own self-centeredness. Now, if you live self-centered long enough, you'll start to manifest certain symptoms. And so here's just a list of some of the symptoms that you're going to manifest as you live in your humanity and the power of self, trying to milk your needs out of everybody around you. And I won't list all of them. I won't talk about all of them, and I won't read the ones that apply to me. We'll try to pick on someone else. But here's just some of the symptoms. People are angry, they're argumentative, they're arrogant, they blame others, they're boastful, they're bossy, they can't receive love, they can't receive compliments, they're compulsive, they're controlled by their emotions, they're critical, they're defensive, they're depressed, they're falsely humble, they feel sorry for themselves, they gossip, they're greedy, they're full of guilt, they're harsh, they hate themselves, they hate others, they hold grudges, they're hypersensitive, they're impatient, they feel inferior, they feel insecure, they're introspective, they're jealous, they're judgmental, they lack love, they lust for power, they manipulate, they're opinionated, they're overbearing, they like to play God, they don't listen, they're possessive, they're proud, they refuse to communicate, they withdraw, they're rude, they're self-absorbed, self-centered, self-condemning, self-confident, self-depreciating, self-motivated, self-indulgent, self-reliant, self-righteous, self-sufficient. They slander, they're slow to forgive, they're quick to speak, they're subjective, they're too submissive, they're touchy, they're unreasonable, they're unreliable, they're unteachable. And when they hear a list like this, they think of all the people that ought to be here to hear it. And like my friend said from Europe, that self-centered people are like bad breath, stinking feet, and body odor. It never bothers the person that has it, but it's killing the rest of us. It's just knocking us out. Now, the first problem we have then is that when we fall away from God, when Adam fell away from God and we did, we're born then completely self-centered. And we've said that self is the part of me that was made in the image of God that is now distorted and living in flesh. And then it expresses a thing called flesh, the deeds of that flesh, that animal life, and we begin to live like an animal. Now there's a second problem that's wrong, a second thing that's wrong with me, and that is that I'm born insane. And so my mind, will, and emotions are like an automobile. If you see an automobile coming towards you with no driver in it, what are you going to do? Well, get out of the way. Because it doesn't matter if it's going straight, it doesn't matter if it's swerving, it doesn't matter if it's rolling. We know that if there's no driver in that car, we're in trouble. Now, if we're born with no driver and we were created to have the Spirit ruling over the mind, will, and emotions to be the driver, and I don't have a driver, I'm insane. The technical definition of sanity is mind, will, and emotions in touch with reality. Insanity is mind, will, and emotions out of touch with reality. If I'm born cut off from God, then I'm born cut off from reality. And Ecclesiastes 9:3 says insanity's in their heart. So now we've got a big problem in that I'm looking for my needs and I'm a crazy person looking for them. Have you ever questioned the thoughts that you have? When you have a thought, is it God's thought? Is it Satan's thought? Is it your conscience? Is it your mind? Where's it coming from? And we don't judge those thoughts, and it'll take us down a track that's incredible. So we look at it like this, that Satan will always speak to you in a first-person singular voice with an Oklahoma accent. He won't walk up to you and tell you you're a hopeless person. Because do you know, you let Satan say things to you that you'd never let another person say to you. It's amazing what he gets away with. And he doesn't walk up and just confront it, because if I walked up to you and said some of the things to you in your face that Satan has said to you in your lifetime, you'd back off and hit me. And so he has to come up behind us in a voice that sounds like ours, and he doesn't say, you're worthless. He says, I'm worthless, and it's all hopeless. And I shouldn't be treated that way, and I'm going to make a case that proves it. And here's what my wife has been doing to me, and here's what the kids have been doing to me. And you start making a list, assuming that it's your voice. Now, the next thing he wants you to believe then, once you buy into that's your voice, and that's you, and you're not judging it, he wants you to buy into this deception that a temptation equals the heart's desire. Now, obviously, if you close off Christ's life, you're living in your humanity, you're living in yourself, and you're not denying it, there's going to be temptations of the flesh, and you'll see the deeds of the flesh come out. But those temptations of the flesh are totally different than a temptation of the heart. Is a temptation the revelation of a man's heart? Is it? Well, if it is, then the most wicked person would have the most temptations. Well, Christ was tempted in all things, so we know that a temptation is not a revelation of your heart, it's a revelation of the enemy's heart. But I don't believe that very few people actually believe that a temptation does not reveal their heart and their desire. And the proof of that is how many men would stand up and say this, which I think there's very few men that haven't had that thought, especially when you're dealing with adolescents and boys into puberty. I walked through a group of young guys and I was talking to them, and I said, explained the principles of Satan talking to you. And I said, do you know in today's society, Satan at some point will whisper to you, I wonder if I'm a homosexual. I wonder if I'm a homosexual. He'll whisper that to you. And it was just funny because I was talking to all these young guys and you could just see the relief on their faces. And I said, well, you just reject that. That's just the enemy and it's the world and it's what's going on out there. How many men would stand up in church and say, you know, I had a funny temptation this week. I was thinking about running off with another fellow. And then sit down. Well, I can promise you he's not getting a lot of hugs at the door when people leave. How many women are going to stand up and say, oh, well, we're sharing temptations. You know, this week I was just tempted to call the pastor and ask if he'd run off with me. Well, what's a pastor's wife going to do with that? We believe that temptation equals desire. Now, as soon as you believe that, you're trapped. Because what you'll do is you'll begin to obsess on that temptation until it's all that you're thinking about. Because you want to have a right heart. It's interesting, in one survey, and I got to dig it back out, but they found that 30% of men who came to Christ, after they came to Christ, were more likely to be abusive in their language and in their behavior in the family. Now that's interesting, and why is that? Because we're trying to live the divine life in our human strength, and it's frustrating me. And I see the list of the things that I got to keep, and I couldn't keep them. I know that baffled you as much as it did me, because the only standard I had as an unbeliever was to go party. That's how high I had to jump. Well, how much character does that take? Just to have a party on the weekend. The only conviction I ever had is if I didn't get to have a party on Monday night. And it's such a blow, the bars close on Sundays. But I mean, you don't have a big bar to jump over. So I've got the worthless, unacceptable, hopeless Mike over here, and his goal for life is to get to the party. Well, I was a success every weekend. Now you take the same worthless, unacceptable Mike, and now we set the goal up here that you have to live exactly like Jesus. Now, how does a worthless, unacceptable person do that? And the frustration in trying that is incredible, and the self-hatred and the anger that kicks in from doing that. See, we want to have a right heart. We want to have a pure heart. And so when we have a temptation that goes against that, what we do is we pick it up, and something that should have remained very, very small in our lives over here becomes the biggest thing in our whole life to get rid of, and we're obsessed by it. And again, now the enemy has stolen the secret of the Christian life for me, which is the secret of focus. I will keep him in perfect peace whose mind is set on me, and I don't have any peace anymore because my mind isn't set on me. I mean, it isn't set on him any longer. It's set on some other thing. See, you're going along and you're doing just fine, and you have your eyes on Jesus. If I want to get your attention, what's the best thing to do? Throw a leaf at you or grab a brick and hit you upside the head? Well, the brick will get your attention. So if you're going along with your eyes on Christ in perfect peace, don't expect the enemy to bring a leaf to you. He's going to bring some shocking thing, some thought, something out of your past, something that somebody says, some obsession, and then you're going to stop and you'll look at it and take your eyes off of him, and instantly you've lost your peace. Isn't it amazing? We were talking about, a couple of us yesterday, how self-life has its own voice. And I was giving the example, that I like to walk up at our cabin and up in the woods, and I go along the ridge. I've been walking there for years, and now someone's bought the property, and they've got a no trespassing sign up. And I'm walking along with my eyes on Jesus, happy as Larry, praying, and I see that no trespassing sign. And immediately I start thinking, well, I hope he comes up here and stops me and tells me I can't walk up here. I'll walk up here if I want to walk up here, or go anywhere I want to go. I'm not going to have the guy telling me what to do. And I'm going off like that. Where does that come from? Well, why are you even doing that? I'm walking around the block, walking the dog, praying, and all of a sudden, I bet he does that again. I'm not going to take it. I'm going to put up with it. I remember one other time she did something like that. I'm going to go, and I'm just going off on the thing. And all of a sudden, all of my focus is gone. The flesh life, the self life, has its own voice, and it wants to steal from me my focus on Christ and get me focused on absolutely anything else. And the more shocking it is, the better it is. So a lady came into my office. She threw her baby into my arms and said, take the baby, and she just broke down weeping. And she said, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. Every time I get in the car with the baby, I keep having these thoughts to open up the car door and push the baby out. And it was an obsession with her. I said, well, if your child was a teenager, I'd understand that, but this is just a baby. And I said, sister, that is an obsession, and it's the most shocking thing that Satan could bring into the mind of a mother, is to push the baby out the car door, and that's why it got your attention. And what gets your attention gets you. And now you're completely consumed with that thing. And I said, that's the enemy. How many of us have had those kind of thoughts? You're on the edge of the bridge and you think, jump. Worse yet, you're on the edge of the bridge and you look at the person next to you and you think, push. But you have to look at that and say, no, that's the enemy's voice. And deny that and move and shift our focus back on him. Okay, let's take another break.